Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Tracy Cook, and I'm the online media manager for ModernAnalyst.com, the premier community for business analysts. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Executive Guide to Using Process Mining to Succeed in Major Transformations. Today's featured speaker is Keith Ellis. Keith, welcome.
Thanks, Tracy, and I appreciate that. And welcome to the Executive Guide. We're going to talk about process mining today, guys. And, we're also looking at large projects because large projects are very, very different. We have to agree on that, but sometimes it's the same lessons in big ones that also applies to smaller projects or overall transformation within an organization if you're into continuous improvement and things like that. The themes today as we start really drilling down into this is I want to focus in on a couple of things that are really important. One is techniques. How is process mining used as a technique, just like elicitation or any other major technique that you might be using within your business to drive transformation, to drive project success? Let's get down into the weeds and be specific about how you do that. The second part is business agility. When you really look at the underlying, why do you do this? It's because this pace of transformation is accelerating so much today. Business is changing far faster, and we need to find better and better ways of maintaining pace with the rate of change that's going on in the market. Now, I like taking questions as we go along. We make this as interactive as possible. I know we have 300 people on the line today, but let me answer those questions in real time. So to find that Q&A area, just go and find it and just tell me, do you know what process mining is as an area? Okay, just let me know that, and then I will respond back as I go. And Brian, thank you very much. You do. David, no, you're not a familiar. That's what you like to pick up today. Fantastic. So just use that Q&A area and just pop it in there. Terry, thank you very much. You're a yes on this particular one. There's a lot of people here who are going to be more familiar with this. Mario, no. Christy, yes. We've got a lot of people coming back. Let's use that area and just ask your questions as we go. We'll get into it. Jennifer, not yet, with a big exclamation mark. That's fantastic. Use that area and we're going to talk it through, okay? Now, as we get into this, what I want to talk about and get into is looking at it from the perspective of these 5 things, okay? This is what I committed to. No, not looking to learn today. Fantastic. Great question. Now, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about compressing timelines. When you get into large-scale transformation, time is precious. Much more so, it's much more exacerbated than when you're dealing with smaller, and not that there's ever enough time to do a project. I don't know if we can all agree on that. You can say amen in the Q&A area, but it's just the way it is, right? Particularly on the bigger ones, and I'll talk about why. But it's about also increasing benefit, and how do you go about doing that in a non-theoretical way? Like, what are the specific tactics and techniques of actually getting in there and changing the benefit portfolio? Because, amen, thank you, Adrian. Because sometimes you get into these issues. And then finally, not so much reducing staff, but changing what the staff do, if that makes sense, okay? Because if you are so focused on just trying to survive, you really don't get into the benefit area, and then we want to stabilize the business faster, but also prove your business case outcome. You guys like that? Listen, if I don't deliver on these 5 points over the course of this session, you can send me your cranky emails afterwards, okay? 2 slides on Stereologic. In fact, 1 slide on Stereologic. I mean, it's certainly one of the world's first in this whole business in the process mining area. Founded in 2008, the executive team behind it are just spectacular. Sophia and Stan and some of the other people, they were actually behind one of the most successful business analysis software tools out there in the market. Patented, one of the first ones that come out and really patent a number of the areas in here, but also process and task mining, really getting into the end-to-end business process visualization, the measurement. And one of the first questions that everybody say is like, how the heck do you guys go do that stuff? Because it's the level of sophistication in the way that the artificial intelligence behind it works. It certainly gave me confidence years ago to bring them in on a $600–700 million project, but the organization has tremendous breadth of clients, and we work with people in a lot of different industries. So what is it? I know a lot of you are you're new. I'm looking at it, and I'm just kind of sizing it up. I'm going to guess it's maybe 2/3 not familiar with it, but you want to learn, and 1/3 who have. And so let me give you a quick sketch of what process mining is. It's an automated way of understanding the business. That's the best way to think about it, okay? So in the past, you'd normally be using elicitation sessions. You come in and you say, what's going on in the business. Now, this case here, let's focus in on the outcome. You've got an automated way of understanding the business. So the outcome of doing the process mining are three things. One is you've got the process map. You understand exactly what people are doing in the business, okay? A complete BPMN model of, and it's structured to go, I do this step, then this one, then this one, then this one, and these are all my variations and etc. The second thing that you get is the metrics. So you need to be able to answer some tough questions. You need to know how long it takes people to do different things. What are the frequencies with which things are being done? Why is it happening? So when an executive asks you the question, how do we make change? You can kind of go back into the metrics and figure it out. And then finally, the whole purpose of this is to really fuel that whole process analysis, right? That's what it all comes down to, is maximizing the return on every effort that you're making. Figuring out, using the data, why. So instead of spending the time trying to figure out what's going on in the business, you're now able to take that time and really say, well, how do we address this problem? Now, the how of it, all right? The how of it, there are different approaches. Our approach is you've got people who are using Outlook, they're using Excel, they're using many different types of applications. You need to have something mounted on the employee workstation. In our case, it's simply a web browser widget, so there's nothing to install. It is then observing hundreds or thousands of instances of somebody physically doing their job. Is that cool? And it records each one, and it says, okay, I see that this person did this from end to end, this and this end to end, this one, this, and then it puts it all together and creates that end-to-end process from hundreds or thousands of visualizations. And so it's a lot like doing a virtual time and motion study. Does that make sense for people? Do you want me to get into a little bit more explanation on that? The purpose of it of automated discovery is to know, and I think first and foremost, is to know why something is happening in the business. When you look at major transformation, you think about, you step into it and say, what's going on? Why is this happening? How do we now begin to address it? What's the real underlying problem? Until you have sufficient diagnostic, you need to be able to deal with it. Paul, you're raising a fantastic question about privacy. People turn it on and off. You have to give control to the people who are the workers to be able to turn on and off the widget so that you can know when you're recording. And the second thing is that you're right, most people do want to have more of an on-premise. We have a SaaS and an on-premise solution, but because of the type of information you typically are wanting to use, a lot of them are using a more on-premise. The second thing is you got to look at meetings. One of the big risks, say amen if you agree with me on this one, the big risk for a lot of you is not being able to get access to your stakeholders, not being able to get enough time. The risk is meetings. I can't get access to my staff, you know, and then with the larger the project, the more you're getting. Ralph, thanks for your agreement. Paul, Jerry, I appreciate that. You're all in agreement. This is huge, right? The bigger the project, the more complexity, the harder it is, you know, and you can't pull people away, and there just can't be available enough. So you have to be much more selective going forward about how you deal with what meetings we're going to do. And then finally, it's about visualizing and measuring, because you see, like in the normal elicitation techniques and approaches, when you're looking at discovering process, you don't really get the metrics. Does that make sense? You agree with me on that one? You don't really know how much or the frequency. You just kind of know what's happening in the business. You don't know why or how it's happening in the business and the degree to which. And that radically changes when you're dealing with automated discovery. So let's talk about major transformation. You see, when you're dealing with small projects, there's not really an impetus to change sometimes. You get kind of stuck in your ways, right? Are the BPMN auto-generated? Lisa, yes, it is. Absolutely. It automatically names all the steps. It automatically puts it all together for you and lays it out in a sequence. I'll even show you a little abstract of it a little later on today. Let's talk about major digital transformation. You see, like when you look at small projects, people think that they're really good at projects, but the reality is that the run-of-the-mill stuff you're doing, you're 80% of the time you're successful, only 20% challenged. It's completely the opposite when you're dealing with large stuff, over 10 million. And in fact, I wouldn't even put an artificial barrier of 10 million. I'd say if it's discontinuously large. Does that make sense? Do you guys buy into that? Yes? Okay, fantastic. In fact, I'm getting a lot of heavy agreement. In fact, 17% of projects, and this really hasn't changed a lot over a bunch of years, is 17% of projects they go so badly that they threaten the very existence of the company. And you guys all know the stories, right? I'm betting every single one of you could name the name of a company that's had that happen. I can name 24, okay? And so, not that that's a good idea in this thing, but when you look at this, part of the problem is that the same approach, if you approach major transformation with the same ideas and skills and approaches and tools as you do a small project, what is your chance of success? Just tell me flat out. Tell me. Because those guys are not stupid. The ones that did the over 10 in this, the right-hand side, they used their best team. They used their best project manager. They used good business analysts. They used very skilled people, and they probably thought they had fantastic projects on end. What happened? They got killed, right? Why? Probably because they didn't really approach it in a different way. And so that's where I really want to start highlighting some of the issues that go on in here and start really talking about how do you compress timeline? How do you better control scope? Let's take an example and take it out of the theoretical world. Let's go into a specific one. Financial services, okay? And I picked this one just because everybody can understand it. You receive an application, you go to underwriting, customer terms are presented, closing, post-close billing, etc. Okay? We're all familiar with this type of thing. Let's say this is where the major transformation happens. The executive comes along and says, listen, it's taking us an average of over 90 days to close these things. Our competitors are doing it in 35. We have a massive problem on our hands. How many of you have faced a situation that looks exactly like that? Might be a different, slightly different industry. There you go. A bunch of you saying, yeah, absolutely. So when you look at these kinds of areas, the major issue is you have to go figure out what's going on in the business. Receive an application, 47% of the time you don't get information that's complete. 52% of the time the underwriter is requesting more information. But if we just ask for that information up front, we wouldn't have to do that. And then 18% of the cases, the customer's renegotiating the terms. Oh my gosh, these are the issues that are causing it. What is actually the cycle time? It's not, way over 92. It's not way over 90. It's actually 92. So the thing is that it took about a year to get this information. This is actually now I've changed some of the data. This is actually a real live example, okay? A friend of mine, David, went out and had to do this for an organization, all right? And had to go and pull this, right? Is it a lot like value stream mapping? Not really, Paul. I can pick that one up offline. By the way, if I don't get to your question during this session, then I will make sure that I follow up with you before the end of the week, okay, and get back to you with some answers, all right? So, because every once in a while I may not be able to pull. So this particular one, you've got to go get all of the information, all of the downstream information, all the percentages to begin diagnosing how to begin making this transformation. So when you think about larger scale, the bigger project, you're now taking a lot longer to analyze. So the organization now has a full year trying to figure itself out, and it just doesn't have the time. So what do the executives do, right? And the reason why it takes so long is you can't get the right people. The answers lead to a lot more questions, and this is one of the biggest problems, okay? Paul and Lisa and everybody else, one of the biggest problems is that you go answer a question, and that leads to more questions that you can't answer. So then you got to spend more time to go get those answers, and people don't go figure it out. Lisa, yes, we do. And I can show you exactly how that, I can give you the statistical validity of it actually. So in this particular case, if you do say 300 observations, you're going to be correct. The process map is going to be a perfect with 99% confidence. And statistically, something would have to not happen more than say 1% of the time for you to miss it using process mining like this. Awesome detailed question. But anyway, so the answers lead to more questions because the way you go collect the answers is imperfect. The executives sometimes don't believe you, and recollection is imperfect. It's like how many of you guys, it's not that the stakeholders or the staff lie to you, it's just that they don't correctly remember it. And staff are terrible at being able to tell you exactly what the problem is. Like they just don't know, it's not what they're trained to do. And so when you look at a different way, now this is an animated GIF. So see how a person is stepping across the screen, right? This is what Stereologic has collected. You see how it's gone from a mainframe system to a web to Excel to now you're getting many different collections of the same thing. You see how it's now clocked and it, boom, turns it into a full BPMN. Now let's look at it again. So you're going mainframe, you're going across a web server, you're going now into an Excel template and you're picking up now. going now into sending an email, stuff like that. It's collecting hundreds or thousands of iterations of somebody doing exactly the same thing, and it turns it into this, okay? It turns in, yes, Lisa, it does record time, okay? So it's picking up the exact timing on each of these steps. It's also picking up the screenshots and the interactions that are happening in between. So I'll talk to you because you're asking a great question. What is it actually picking up? So that was super simplistic. I just wanted to show you like a, literally a 5-second clip. Was that useful, by the way? It kind of gives you a visualization of what's happening. It's the AI in behind it. It's not a screen capture per se tool. What it's doing is it's the AI in behind it that picks up and looks at hundreds or thousands of iterations of the same process, or people doing multiple interdependent processes, and then it figures out the documentation. So what is it that somebody is doing? How does that work? What are they doing on the screen? What is the procedure manual that goes with this thing? That cool? Okay, so that's the information that it's capturing there. The second piece of information is really the task and performance. So this is your question, Lisa. Does it connect the time? Yes. It knows the exact amount of time. It also knows, more importantly, the frequency. Yes, it does know the difference between human time and machine time. So you can actually pick it up and look at it from the perspective of wait state. So you can, do things like spot. And that's the next one, okay? I'll just talk to that. One of the biggest issues is that you need to also monitor what's called a business event, okay? So a business event in this particular case is going to be like there's an error, or there's a system down, or there's something that's creating a delay. And so this is huge when it comes to a system-related problem, right? When you're doing stabilization, post-stabilization, you're oftentimes looking into this thing called a business event, right? And so in there, what you're able to do is monitor for those things, teach the system how to look for it, and then use that to guide the way you go forward to go and do your implementation. So you have, Mikhail, we do implementations in Europe all the time. So don't worry about that as a question, and we work it. And the last thing is this whole idea of a cross-functionality. So being able to track a process end to end, right? And the big issue, Mikhail, is that you have to have people's permission to do this, okay? We're happy to walk you through how it works in Europe and other places around the world. One of my first ones years ago was in Warsaw, where I used this technology almost 10 years ago. So in this case here, that cross-functional performance and the KPI ultimately is what's driving your major system change, right? When you're looking at that, it's driving the whole thing. Now here, remember how we all agreed earlier that the massive issue, one of the biggest problems out there, is access to stakeholders, right? It's access to people, right? Oh, Horatio, yeah, no problem. So you're sending the presentation after. Just send me an email at sales@stereologic.com. I'll have that at just sales, and you see Stereologic written out at the bottom of the screen. So send an email to that, and I will send you the slides afterwards, okay? Now, let's go look at the impact on manual discovery, okay, versus Stereologic. Now, this was actually done by a massive consulting company, benchmarked us against, because they had exactly the same process discovered by Stereologic versus discovered by manual processing, okay, or manual collection. And what we found, the massive difference was the time compression and the subject expert time utilization, okay? Both of those are huge. Does it hand over PowerPoints to the end-to-end process? Yeah, it does actually, Lisa. I'll show you how to do that later on, okay? Manual, it took 2 months to figure out the process. Using Stereologic, it was 5 days. That's an 87% compression. Manual subject expert time. Now here is the magic. Okay, more than any other area, it's how much subject expert time are you consuming, because that is one of the biggest problems in large-scale transformation. Those people are busy doing other things. You can't get access to them, right? There was a 99.4% reduction in that. And then the accuracy of the mapping, we can show the statistical accuracy of this using this approach versus, FIME systems being used were absolutely missed. You guys surprised by that, right? That you can take a large, complicated area of the business and you can pick it up and actually record end-to-end how that process gets discovered, right? Process mining is, yes, absolutely, Vlas. Process mining is a way of 100% ensuring compliance. How long does it take to implement, Lisa? It takes about couple hours, okay? I could have it up, running, and completed a project in about less than 10 days. So Vlad, you're absolutely right. But what we're talking about is major transformation. And let's go through from the beginning, okay? When we talk about major transformation, the first thing that you've got to deal with is discovery. How is this working today? Because that's when you start looking at your risks, right? You start looking at what are the risks that you're dealing with in your business? How do you set up the project charter? How do you set up this project for success? Can we all agree on that? How do you nail that down, right? You have to animate that process. You have to demonstrate to the executive that you know where the issues are. You have to know where your areas of gain are going to come from. You have to measure the current state performance, right? These are all things that you must do when you are dealing with a major transformation. Do we all agree on that? You have to do that. You need to know where the gain is. You must have the data to build the business case. No executive is going to go before their board on a $10 million thing with fluffy stuff. It just doesn't happen any longer. You have to be able to deal with it. Lisa, let me pull that question of onboarding and engagement process offline and I'll follow up. Just send me a note to sales@stereologic.com and I will follow up with you in a lot more detail on that. Do you work with hypotheses? Yes, you absolutely can. Do you have the data to build a business case? Do you know where that's coming from? So much of this you need to deal with, okay, is the KPIs, the performance data, because you need to be able to build that business case out. More importantly, you're going to use that to control the entire engagement and ensure you're getting to success. Remember, without something like this, you have a 10% success rate. You're now going to invert that. So you need to have much better understanding of the problem, much better business case that you're walking in with. And the set of KPIs that the executive want to influence, you're going to use those throughout the transformation process. Does that make sense? It's a completely different way of doing project management. However, this is really, really important, okay? Can you also scope better, right? When you use the methodology in here, what you're trying to do is you need to know what systems are impacted. You need to know the exact processes, right? You need to know the exact processes that are being impacted, and you need to know how those processes function. Thank you very much for your kind words, Ivan. I really appreciate that. In this case here, when you get through this process, you have better scope control because you're not surprised, but oh my God, there's 5 systems here that I missed along the way. Does that make sense, guys? Like if you went and you got that, do you feel that you could take that 1 year of at the beginning of the whole process, you know, on a major transformation? A lot of times that takes a full year. If you agree with me on that, do you feel that with this base of information, you could compress that down to 4 months? Not that you have to, but it allows you to do it if you so choose, because the executive, I find, are increasingly impatient. Would you agree with me on that? People are increasingly impatient. You need to get this base of information at a far faster pace. Do you agree? I got lots of people agreeing. In fact, I got a lot of different types of questions that are floating in right now. Fantastic. Guys, I really appreciate that. But let me know that you agree, because I want to make sure that if you're not in agreement, I'm picking it up as we go. I'm going to talk now as we go forward. I'm going to change gears. I'm going to talk about during, hey, I got a lot of thumbs up, Ralph and Mayor, yeah. So during transformation, do you guys look like this? I'm sorry, I just thought this was going to be a lot of fun. During transformation, it is that high velocity, you are running fast, you are running really hard. You have no idea what's going to mess up. You just know that it's going to mess up somewhere. I want to talk about how do you increase benefit. I want to talk about how do you stabilize the organization far faster. And we need to use staff far more efficiently. Hopefully that's a good agenda for people, okay? The big issue here, and I'm going to throw out a little bit of a theoretical model just to kind of walk you through it. When you look at large-scale transformations, about 45% are over budget, but the biggest problem is that more than 60, it's about 60%, it's even higher than that really, less value is delivered than predicted. This is a McKinsey study. When you look at the chaos reports, it's way higher than that, okay? And I'm going to talk about the why of this, and I'm going to look at it from the perspective of what are people focused on. When you do a large-scale system transformation, so often the issue is the basic functioning of the business. You're so focused on what I call stabilization that you never get to what is this new functionality that's being realized, augmentation, and is that working really well? And then above that is really the capability realized. It's the integration, right? And then above that is the capability optimized. And by the way, there's a white paper on this, Lisa, and I can send you, all right? If you want to know where these studies are that I'm quoting, I'm happy to send that stuff to you, no worries. Capability optimized is the experience is realized. Does that make sense? So when I go from basic functioning of the business to capability, like, where are the executives on this chart? Just give me an answer. Where do you see the executives? What are they focused on? Exactly. They're focused on the top of that darn chart. Capability optimization, right? That's where their business case is. That's what they want. Where is the IT organization so focused? So much of it, when you look at the proportion of effort, they spend almost all their time on the basic functioning of the business. It's all about stabilization. You're right, Vlas, exactly right. It's all stabilization related. Everybody is focused on that. So the problem is you have to invert it, the bottom and mid layer. Exactly right. I've been focused, I've been engaged in HR transformation. Absolutely, Vlas. That, in fact, this gets used heavily in HR areas as well, because it auto-generates all of the operating procedures, standard operating procedures of the company. We did a massive deal for a major organization in Europe, and they were moving, offshoring all these processes. And that's a classic example of HR transformation. You're moving from one area to another in an outsourcing kind of mode, and it gets used for that all the time. Another one in here, like, so when you think about major transformation, it's that bottom to top, right? That inversion of this pyramid. Can we agree that that's the problem? Like, that's what you need to do, right? You like that one? Fantastic. So why does it happen? The first thing is it's very inefficient allocation of resources. You get stuck, okay? You get stuck keeping the lights on, right? You get stuck allocating your resources to keeping the lights on. So therefore, there's not enough resource delivering the operational transformation needed to align what we're doing to strategy. It gets broken. Does that make sense? You break it. You just, oh, we can't do that. We got to minimize. We're going to implement. It's another way of saying we're going to implement without any customization or whatever the heck. You know what I mean? It's like, wow, okay, wow. Now, the next thing that happens is that shifting priorities, because all of a sudden, that process without alignment to strategy causes the executives to begin panicking as you get later and later into the implementation cycle, and that causes the change, right? It causes you to then shift and try to reallocate resources to save it, and then that creates a spin. You get into this negative spin cycle. Does that make sense, guys? You can get into a very painful, very dangerous. Why does major transformation fail? It's this negative spin cycle. So what I need to do is talk to you about very specific techniques. What techniques can you use to avoid this dangerous spin cycle? First of all, we need to talk about how do you reduce spending on stabilization, keeping the lights on, as Lisa says, okay? And then what I want to do is talk to you about how do you increase the spending on realization without killing yourself. Does that make sense? That's what we are. Like, sometimes it's the simplest ideas, right, that really work well. But the problem in implementing the idea is that you need the technique to power it. You can't just wiggle your fingers and say, let's do this. You got to have different tools to be able to drive a larger scale transformation, right? And the issue is that when I'm dealing with stabilization, would you guys agree on a bigger project, you're dealing typically with a year, right? A lot of times you can't get the organization to stabilize in less than a year. Well, that's just way too long, right? You run out of runway and you get killed along the way, if that makes sense, okay? Now, I'm going through this very, very, very quickly, right? I'm getting a lot of questions I'm going to do. You monitor the process. Exactly, Lisa. Yes, you do. You monitor the process, and you are that. You see, now you're taking my thunder. You know where I'm going. You do monitor the process continuously as you're making your incremental changes. Now, there are two major issues, but I need to kind of roll the methodology around this as we go. Brian, let me just roll the methodology around this. The two pieces that we're trying to deal with. One piece is that inability to stabilize the business efficiently. The second piece is the inability to track how the project is impacting business capability, okay? Those are the two interdependent things. You're pushing down on one side, pushing up on the other, okay? The way to deal with that are the two things. One is you get very inconclusive user feedback. As you go out and you begin incremental rollout, as Brian and Jerry and Lisa are mentioning, you get users suck. They're terrible at helping you understand what's wrong and what needs to be fixed and which area. Whenever you're dealing with a large-scale transformation, you have so much change that's happening, you don't know where to start. And your traditional method of burn down management simply does not work, okay? It takes too long and it's too inefficient. The next ability in it, the issue is this user reporting. It's ridiculous what people do. You're waiting for the user to discover the errors, and it's like an Easter egg hunt, and then you're creating that same Easter egg hunt for the developers, because they've got to replicate the error, and now all of a sudden you've got very inefficient use of your development resources. Does that make sense? So we're going to change two major things. I'm going to show you a technique that's coming right out of Stereologic. It's the data. Remember, what we're doing here is we're able to monitor the before, and you should have been monitoring the before, understanding what's going on in the business, knowing the baseline. You're continuously watching what tools and management processes you're dealing with, and you're picking it up. Doesn't matter what's happening, doesn't matter the errors. So what you now know is, as people are kind of asking questions about, you now know what's really happening in the business as you roll out your iterations, right? You know how the process is changing. You want to be able to deal with those problems as you go. You're able to train the system to look for critical errors, like that red text on the screen that's indicating an error. You're able to train the system to look for delays, like the little spinny wheel on the screen. You're actually able to train the system to identify those business events that impede your ability to function. Is that cool? Right? So rather than relying on the business to tell you something's broken, the monitoring, the process mining is identifying it for you. Does that make sense? It's driving it much faster. And you're right, Jerry, you're identifying there's a human issue, and then there is the human resistance to change issue, and there is the system side. Let me talk to both of those, because it is so critically important. And you're right, people want to break it and misrepresent it. Lisa, you're coming back with that one, right? Sometimes they do, and sometimes, they're well-intentioned, but we need to separate it out, because, you need to make a choice. Do you need to fix this problem? Sometimes and often the answer is we do not. Right now, when you're dealing, how many people here have significant experience with major transformation projects? There's a lot of you, right? Yeah, I'm seeing yes. The issue that you get into, it's kind of he who screams loudest or she who screams loudest. Jennifer, fantastic. She who screams loudest are the one that get addressed, right? And so you get into a situation of not knowing criticality, not understanding how to most effectively and efficiently prioritize. Stabilization and the use of your resources when you're in the midst of a major project is all about prioritization. You need to radically change how you prioritize when you stabilize. That's the magic, right? That's ultimately the magic, and be able to ask yourself, do you need to fix this? Let me show you a burn down chart. This was used on a major transformation some time ago. It's been redacted, so we're all good. Change some of the numbers and things. Take a look at this. What we have is a situation where you're now into being able to automatically generate this, not only daily, but this is like Monday at such and such an hour versus Monday at a different set of hours. You're generating this data at this level, being able to monitor how many application errors are coming out. Cool, right? Those, who do I give those application errors to? I can give those directly to developers, right? I find that I have 86 human errors, right? How many human errors do we have? Because that's coming back to this organizational change. Who do I give those to? I give those to my training organization, right? To really look at this process and say, is this process just way too cumbersome? Is this a problem, right? Mikhail, yeah, you absolutely can do it for measuring of usability. how much time is being set and needed to use to the next step? Where do they stop? Where do they start and get better design? 100%. 100%. In fact, what you're touching on is so critical to the next part of this, because when you start talking about the achievement of an executive's goal, it's very different. It's all tied to that, right? So you can absolutely, and people use it for RPA all the time, understanding what the repetitive tasks are and things like that. But now you've got different cues, right? You can send the application error to the developer. You can send the human error to your change management team. You can send the delays to your architecture team. You see how that's now working? You see how it's now prioritized, right? You're not dealing with, I think there's a problem. When that person calls and says, I have this issue, the system already knows, right? So you want that reporting back. It's coming in. The delays are there. You're identifying it in real time. Now you have to be monitoring, right? So you're only going to discover during that period, but you're going to pick it up as you go out, right? The delays also, you can now categorize. Are we seeing something that's more than a 7-second delay or some other number that you want? You see now you're categorizing because now I have 300. When you're dealing with major transformation issues, this particular one going out there, just on the one screen here, you're seeing 400 issues. Can we agree? Major transformation, 400 issues. Easy, right? Easy to have 400 issues. Which one do you spend your time on right now? That's the problem, okay? And how efficient are your staff at dealing with those issues? That's the magic in something like this. How do you tell delays and errors in the application? Do you find sensors? Actually, it's just smart enough. It's the ideas. It's the AI. It's the artificial intelligence that picks that up and understands what the delay is. Now, the issue is this, okay? When you go to your development team and say, here's an error, today you're using human reporting of that error, right? You're going to the development team and somebody calls the center, the help desk, and says, I've got this problem. And they say, well, what happened? What were you doing? Well, I'm sorry, but that person was working with the lender. They were out talking with the customer. They can't remember exactly what they did or how to replicate it, nor can they. So you spend all your time, you know, about 2/3 of people's time, developer time, is trying to replicate some weird description of a problem. They can't figure it out, right? In this case here, every single detection of an error is accompanied by this information. Step 1, I was doing this. Step 2, I went to click on the E statement. Step 3, I clicked on the client, and then I got a system error. There it is. You now know. Our system is smart enough to figure that out. And then here's the recorded documentation, right? So I want to see what's under the hood, Flash. No problem. We can get that to you. Send me an email to sales@stereologic.com, okay? And I'll make sure that somebody gets back to you. So when you detect it this way, the screens are there, but not only the screens, but it's the timing, right? You need to know exactly when that occurred so that you can go back into the database log and you can see it. You can figure out what happened at that time, right? And so the issue is really critical. How does this work with customer-facing tools? Oh, that's fantastic. So the issue is going to be, it'll work with any of the personal productivity tools like Excel and Outlook and things like that. Like you have structured process and you have unstructured process. You have to be able to collect both. And I've got a great example at the end where you could have expert employees like anti-money laundering, right? And they're doing very complex tasks that tend to have a lot of interaction, web research and things like that. You need to capture that, and you can with Stereologic and do that hyper efficiently. It's no different than somebody who is a transactional employee. But when you're doing a major transformation like this, you have to do both very efficiently. And if you can't, you have a massive problem on your hands because the tooling just won't drive the outcome that you need to get to. Now, let's go from this. Now, do you see how this totally changes the amount of staff, right? So how does this work with customer-facing tools? Absolutely, I can talk to you about that. So remove staff from the diagnostic. Now, let's talk about improving the business case. Can we see that if you did just those two things, change how you manage your burn down and change how you do your error reporting, right? That anytime somebody's making an error, like a logical error, like meaning the human is making an error, you know what series of steps they typically took and why they did it wrong. That's easy for the HR organization. Can you see how when I hand it to my dev team, here's this bug, go fix it, here's where the error is coming in, that the dev team can figure that out awfully fast. You're knocking about 2/3 of the time out. Does that make sense, guys? You agree with me on that? Okay. Okay, Brian saying way more than that is saved. Okay, fantastic. I appreciate the 2 thumbs up. You can go amen if you want, if you agree, okay? Now, or hell yeah, I get a lot of that. So focusing your spending to improve benefit realization, what we had to do was pull down the amount on stabilization and radically shift to push more money, more benefit into realization, okay? So how do we shift that? What I want to do is talk about iterative KPI management in this world, because remember, when you're doing manual discovery or some other thing, it takes you a lot to figure out what the KPI, what's the big change. And so if that KPI is, I want to go from 92 days cycle time on a process, and I want to take it down to 60. In this world, you can measure the cycle time in real time. You know what I mean? Like, you can see what's happening. Now, you might cycle time 60 days. You might have to elapse a cycle or two. But the issue is, like, if you're dealing with shorter things, you can really figure out in real time how every piece of it is working, right? And you can see the composite end-to-end, how it's going to go. Does that make sense? So in this case here, benefit realization is, it starts with what was the business case and KPI behind it. Now, all of you in the project management world have said, I need to understand very clearly what it is we're trying to accomplish from an executive perspective. But none of you, and I will challenge you on this, if you disagree with me, you tell me. None of you can implement that really in the way you manage your project. Does that make sense? None of you. So end-to-end process, order to cash, if it's really the cycle, you kind of get it out there, and then you measure once before, and then you measure once later, and you don't have an ability to continuously monitor, right? External customers, different thing, Mikhail, so you got to talk to us about that, okay? What you want to do is in that case, there are different ways of going and implementing that, Mikhail, that type of thing. Just reach out to me at sales@stereologic.com. I will respond back, and we'll show you how you deal with that situation. Now, improving the customer experience, right? If it's your responsiveness and things like that, you're dealing with an internal team, your business events, these sorts of things, the productivity, time with the customer versus other things, like, am I spending things on our time? What was the business case that's driving this, the KPI? Once you know that KPI, I want you to manage that. I want you to continuously monitor that using process mining. Does that make sense? Because when you do that, you're going to identify the areas. The second thing is, what's the transformational capability? When you step up my pyramid and you go from augmenting to transforming a capability, that's what the executive cares about, right? You're going to look at how often that's being used, the frequency, speed to market, these other kinds of things that they're trying to accomplish. So you can actually measure it. And then you can see what's impacting our ability to deliver on that transformation of the capability. You see how that changes? You actually have the tooling as a manager to figure out, are we actually making these changes that we need to make? If we are making these changes, how do I then tune? How do I identify what's between where I am today and in the future where I need to go? Or if it's radical change in core costs, how do I then enliven this so I know what FTE I can remove, and that I know productivity has shifted enough that I can actually take those people out of my organization? How you get there is this concept of continuous benchmarking, okay? In the past, doing a benchmark is ridiculously difficult. In our world, doing automated performance evaluation is ridiculously simple. You've got your before, and then you're releasing an iteration, and you see what the benchmark is. You know what those KPI performance changes are. They'll be worse. You're then doing another iteration release on your major project. You're doing an agile flow. But when you have automated continuous benchmarking available, you know at any instant what the performance is. Does that make sense, guys? Do you see how that changes your world in terms of how you go about delivering major projects? You're able to really loop it. Yes, exactly, Lisa. You loop that feedback into the process, right? So you can do and drive it from a customer feedback perspective, but in reality, what you're able to do is see more than that. Because you've captured the complete picture of customer feedback, you're generating a process map that looks like this, let's say, for example, okay? And you now know where your hotspots are, right? So based on my issues, now I've colored them red for the purpose of this, but based on my issues, trying to deliver you need to separate, is this a process issue, a system issue, a human issue, right? What's impeding? I now see a chain of events on my first launch, where three things are taking overly long periods of time. I'm not able to achieve my KPI largely because of that. I'm not able to achieve my KPI largely because of these last two lighter steps. You see how I can now isolate where I have high degrees of inefficiency relative to the outcome that I'm trying to achieve. I'm able to then prioritize which one contributes the most, either to error rate or quality, or I've got high degrees of variability in performance, and I need to. This is really much more of a compliance issue, as somebody else mentioned earlier. These kinds of things. I can physically measure these kinds of things. I can continuously look at where am I getting issues. You know what's funny about this chart? My boss might getting annoyed at me. This is actually a chart where they were benchmarking, and I just used it as an example so people can use it. This is actually a chart where people were benchmarking stereologic versus manual discovery. The reds are actually processes where not only was the step missed, but the interaction with a completely different system was missed. Isn't that crazy? That's what happens when you're doing, manual discovery. It ends up throwing people off. But does that give you a sense of the idea of, first and foremost, you have that complete understanding what the process is. You know how long each of these steps is taking. You know what's happening underneath the cover. Is that cool? All right. You use that information, as you say, to loop it back in and say, what prioritize fixes do I now make to this overall thing? Do I bring in, say, RPA? Because I can't, in the system itself that I'm implementing, deal with this one issue. But I could use RPA and deal with that whole thing to patch it for a period of time, help my executive achieve the outcome that they're looking to achieve. Is that cool? Make sense? Awesome? Awesome. Cool. I like it. The second thing is it could be a human problem. And this is what one of you mentioned earlier, say, like, you can do an A/B testing, absolutely. So this is a great example of exactly what you're talking about here. You have an optimal, this is, again, real data you can tell. You have an optimal path. You have staff members, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can have groups. You can have group A versus group B, and how are they performing, right? The Stereologic just generates the data for you. How you use it and how you drive the business is for you, right, to determine. But in this case here, you've got an optimal path, which is 17 seconds to do it. But 14 minutes to do it. But you have staff member 1, staff member 2. Staff member 2, take a look at how long it's taken them. It's crazy. 3 and 4. Number 4 is taking so long. So now you have a methodology of saying, well, what errors are these people making? Why are they making those errors? If we tune the system, would it be more error resistant in the way we're doing things? If we changed how we approach this, how are we going to deal with this? Would it make it much easier for everybody to work through, right? The second thing is we're starting to get into now is isolating the difference between human problem and system problem. Does that make sense, guys? You're really taking it into better understanding of the core team to know exactly what's going on within the business as a whole, right? You don't have to rely on the business to tell you what's going on. You can see it and then make a much more objective decision on how you want to deal with it. Does that make sense, guys? Cool? Right? And yes, you can actually, there are people, Jerry is asking the question, can you monitor the differences between optimal path and non-optimal? Yes, you can, right? And you can say how many people are following this versus the other. It all depends on what you want to ask and answer. So it's providing you that tooling to get at the answers, if that makes sense. So when you use this as a technique, you're changing the way you approach the problem. You're giving yourself the tools that you need to be successful in a very large-scale engagement, right? Let's talk about continuous benchmarking. Continuous benchmarking really is about prioritization. When you're in the midst of a very, very large-scale transformation, I don't care how much testing you did, something's going to break. Right? What the heck's the real story? You have to know that, right? What is the next best thing for us to fix that will improve our KPI performance, that will improve our stabilization? What is the next best thing? And then how efficient are we at fixing it? Can we agree, if we solve that one problem, your whole world becomes much more efficient. Can we agree on that? Knowing the next best thing to put in that sprint for you to fix changes everything about large-scale engagements, large transformations. That makes sense, guys? Absolutely radically shifts it. Because now you're dealing with very, very efficient use of resources. This is why large organizations like the one I was showing you earlier, they actually stabilized, I think it was in 2.5 months. That was a $300 million project. So I'm going to just show you the chart. This chart here, guys, sorry, I'm flipping things. This chart here was a $300 million project, and they stabilized it in just about 2 months, okay? Who does that? It's next to impossible unless you have highly efficient resource utilization. But if you can compress the front end of your project down into 4 months, and you can compress the back end of your project down, what does that mean? The world is shifting in such a significant way today because the rate of change is radically altering. Remember Moore's Law? And I'm diverging just a little bit on the chart here, but remember Moore's Law where it says, you know, every 2 years you double the performance? Can we all agree that that's happening actually in the business world, right? That our concern in the business world today is that organizations don't have the tools to keep up with the pace of change. The number and magnitude of change is radically altering, right? So you know, what was a significant change years ago, today is so much more significant, the degree of change. GDPR is a great example of that when it rolled out. Massive. Anti-money laundering, massive. All these things are happening in much shorter cycles. You don't have time to analyze the hell out of it. You got to go get the data and just have it instantly available. You can't have a year to stabilize the business because the next big thing is coming out. Continuous benchmarking absolutely drives it. And so you're right, on very small projects. So the idea here, guys, is these concepts will drive success in a very, very large project, but they also work, as Marianne points out, on small stuff, right? You take the same basic construct and you apply it to small stuff, continuous improvement, because every single time you do a project, it's about value realization and just being better at that. So it doesn't matter how much testing you do, you're going to break something. What's the real story? What's actually happening? You're going to focus your sprint planning as much on the KPI optimization as on stabilization. By doing that, you radically alter your benefit portfolio and what's happening. And then finally, you're going to be clear on the biggest sources of disruption. Once you get past manual reporting and you take it to the analyst in the background to say, here's the process, here's what's going on, I see breakage, what's going on. Give me my best alternative. Come back with a recommendation. The people in the business are so focused on value realization, you change where they go. It's not, can I get the data? It's now in the face of this data, what is the next best thing to do? You're clear on the source of the disruption. Is it people, is it process, is it technology? And you now have a better way of dealing with it. So you're now iterating and driving your iteration using continuous benchmarking. Isn't that cool? Really, really different way of approaching things, right? Now, I'm going to go one step further, okay, guys? Because it's not really necessarily large project. This is a way of life, right? It is the way to drive very significant transformational change across an organization. As Marianne was pointing out, continuous benchmarking works on the smallest and to the largest. This is like RPA-driven stuff that we're talking about here. But here's an example that was used in publicly a couple of times, so let's just talk about it. And the guy who does this presentation, fantastic guy. Transformation, right, using process mining. This is 3 companies, all have the same owner. They're very cost sensitive. And the idea here was that they needed to have a way of continuously optimizing and automating their operations. And so you've got 2 classes of company. And this is where people kind of hiccup is, oh, well, process mining is not going to work for me. Well, wait a minute now. You got one which is very repeatable and structured process. Many employees in performing those. The second one, Wilson Re, is actually not repeatable and unstructured process performed by high-level specialists. Isn't that cool? Now take a look at the gains. Doesn't matter. You actually have twice the gain coming out of the Wilson Re one, right? Now this one here was more, you know, RPA oriented, but it's a robotic process automation oriented. But the same principle applies. You're monitoring employees. You're extracting how they do things. You're extracting where they're going. And you're continuously monitoring the business. Now take a look at this. Who's going to be able to compete with these guys if they can continuously drive down their costs 34%? vary 65%, Wilson Reed 60%. Isn't that it's crazy, the level of success that they're getting on fairly large-scale projects. But you use this as more of a transformation technique to increase your change velocity. Remember how I said ultimately this discussion is really about business agility. How do you have tooling that enables you to be more agile as a business? And Mariana, you're saying it better. It helps us add what works and eliminate what doesn't. Mariana, that's such a perfect way of saying it. I'm going to just repeat that to the rest of the audience. Now, what was I going to talk about? Okay, now hopefully I did these things. And if I didn't, you can send me your cranky email, okay? I said I would talk about compressing timelines on large-scale transformations, first and foremost. That's what I wanted to do, because really the pace of change is so much more pervasive. We have to do twice as much in half the amount of time. You don't have a year to go figure out what's going on in the business. And you have to use continuous benchmarking to really get down and focus in on what is the next best thing to fix, the prioritization. And that's driven by frequency. How often is something happening? It's also driven by magnitude of impact. And knowing those two things, you're able to make much better business decisions. The next thing is increasing benefits. If all of your focus is on stabilization, oh my God, it's like driving a car. You know, when you're driving a car, if you're looking at where the accident is, guess where you're going to end up? You're going to end up in the accident. But if you're looking at the road that you need to be on, you're going to end up on the road. Does that make sense? Same thing happens in project world. If your entire world is so focused on stabilizing the business, all you're doing is stabilizing the business. You don't actually get to the higher level stuff that you need to do, like value realization. It's so hard to do, and doing more with less. You have to be able to do that. And I'm not saying that it's like ABS brakes where you make the gap between the cars so small you're going to crash. No. You make sure that every project that you do, you have a reasonable amount of time, but you spend more time doing what's going to add value. Does that make sense? And then finally, we need to look at stabilizing. We need to reduce the time on projects by reorienting where they focus, but taking staff out of it, so you're not spending all your time trying to get a hold of staff, and you're using those staff to actually do their job, and then you're stabilizing the business faster to then improve it, if that makes sense for everybody, okay? So with that, hopefully I achieved all of those objectives very quickly, right, over the course of the discussion here. But I got about 2 minutes, and I can still answer questions. By the way, you guys know, actually, Vlas, you say that massive log can generate spaghetti diagram. We have solved that, right? So we know how to turn that into true BPMN with, a sequencing, right? So we know how to do that, and we're one of the only ones that can, okay? So it's really, our approach to it is very different than using database logs to go do this. When you use database logs, you get a spaghetti diagram, you're right, to do process mining. When you do it our way, you get completely the opposite. You're getting a sequential series of steps that are taken, and you know the frequency, and you know the sequencing, you know what happened first and what happened later, and you can see, and that's where our patents are, is really understanding how to sequence those into what the actual business processes are, and then how to connect them. Can you connect to ServiceNow or such as? So that's a question I'm going to relate over to Stan, one of our SVPs, because yes, you can export from Stereologic into many other types of systems, the standard BPMN, as well as all of the data that I'm showing you. You can export that into all of these other systems. Yes, send me a note to sales@stereologic.com. I will send you my slides. Thank you so much. I will. No, I appreciate your kind words. I will send you my slides, and you can pick them up from there. And I know that Tracy will also come back on and tell you how to get a copy of the recording to get in here. Lisa, thank you for your very kind words here, and send me those notes because, certainly I'm happy to follow up as you have other questions. Process mining is a very sophisticated area, but ultimately, guys, I want you to think about this. It's about mining truth. What is really going on in your business? And when you go about it in a way that you get convoluted spaghetti, that's not the truth. That's not the full picture of what's going on. Truth happens when you can really orient in on what am I trying to accomplish? And if I can get that information and I can center, then I'm able to drive continuous benchmarking in my business. It's a radically different way of going about and working of working in the business, okay? It changes the way you're able to go about doing large-scale transformation. And with that, again, send me your questions if you have others afterwards. I'm going to turn it back over to Tracy, who now knows that I am exactly 1 minute over. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you for such an excellent presentation today. We'd also like to thank Stereologic Limited for sponsoring today's webinar. And thanks for everyone for attending today's webinar. I'd like to remind everyone that today's webinar, along with the slides, will be archived at the ModernAnalyst.com website within 2 business days. And with that, this concludes today's event. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Wonderful.